Hi everyone, we're back with part 2 of lecture 14 on ancient African civilizations. We're picking up with the kingdom of Mali, which will end up taking over the former lands of the kingdom of Ghana and expanding them tremendously. The leaders of Mali will also grow quite wealthy, controlling the gold supply coming from the mines in West Africa. In fact, by the time the kingdom of Mali rises to power during the 12th century CE, about 60% of the global supply of gold was coming just from these West African mines. We'll see that as Islam continued to make its way into West Africa, the leadership class in Mali will convert to Islam, the so-called Keita dynasty. And now's a good time to talk about a very devout Muslim ruler in the kingdom of Mali known as Mansa Musa. Mansa Musa took over the throne after his brother failed to return from the famous pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj. His brother disappeared. So Mansa Musa will take over in 1312 and will take over a very large and expansive and wealthy empire containing some 8 million residents. He will continue to expand Mali under his leadership, conquering some 24 different cities, including the city of Timbuktu. In fact, Mali, by 1350, after Mansa Musa's death, Mali was the largest land empire on earth except for the Mongol Empire in Asia. So it's a huge sprawling empire at this point. We know a good bit more about Mansa Musa because of his famous pilgrimage to Mecca. He too will practice the Hajj as a devout Muslim, the journey to and from the holy city of Mecca. And when he makes this pilgrimage in 1324, he doesn't travel alone. He travels in style. He will take with him reportedly an entourage of some 500 slaves, each one bearing a golden staff. His slaves were driving some 90 camels loaded with a reported 4 tons worth of gold. Remember, they don't have credit cards. They don't have Venmo or PayPal or any other payment forms. They have to carry all the money they're going to need with them to make this very long trip. So when they come to North Africa, specifically the city of Cairo, they will take some time to rest. They will spend a lot of money in gold in Cairo. They will do the same on their return trip back from the Arabian Peninsula. They'll spend some time resting and recuperating in the city of Cairo. They will spend so much gold in that city that they will depress its price on the Cairo exchange for decades. In other words, they make it rain up in the city of Cairo while they're there, and they bottom out the value of gold. They ruin it for about 20 years afterwards. This is partially what gains him international notoriety. You can see the image from a Catalan atlas, a Spanish atlas, circa 1375. This is when people begin to hear this fabulously wealthy and influential king of Mali. In fact, in 2015, Money magazine named him the richest man possibly to have ever lived. They estimated his net worth at around $400 billion. When he returned from this journey, his faith renewed, he committed to building a number of magnificent mosques in major cities. He also helped establish Quranic schools for teaching Islam throughout his kingdom, and will create the first university in West Africa, in Timbuktu. Unfortunately, things began to fall apart after his death as court intrigue and factional disputes began to weaken the empire from within, setting them up for, you guessed it, invasion from outside forces. The next major kingdom to take control of these very important gold mines in West Africa will be the Songhai Kingdom, which will rise to power between about 1400 and 1600 CE. One of the world's most expansive empires, the Songhai Kingdom stretched from the Atlas Mountains of North Africa through the Sahara Desert to the tropical forests of present-day Cameroon, embracing thousands of different cultures. It's the largest land empire in all of African history. In order to rule such a large area, the Songhai Empire had an army that numbered more than 200,000 men, consisting of at least 10,000 cavalrymen bearing bows with poisoned arrows or flaming arrows. They had developed an early use for chain mail armor. Under one of their rulers as well, the empire also created a navy of more than 400 warships designed to patrol the Niger River running through the middle of the empire. The empire will reach its height, though, under General Touré, also known as Askia Mohammed. Askia Mohammed, during his reign between 1493 and 1528, will manage to effect several important reforms. Probably first and foremost, we'll see that he will definitely try to promote Islam to shore up his political and cultural control, but he will create an extensive bureaucracy to help him rule this vast kingdom with so many different nationalities under his domination. He will also open up government service to people of all different backgrounds. Askia Muhammad was not born into a wealthy family. He was not born into nobility. He worked his way up through military service and just happened to be in the right place at the right time to seize power when he did. But he was someone who appreciated hard work, ingenuity, and he wanted to make sure that people, even from low-born backgrounds, could achieve good things in his empire. He also helped to implement a unified system of weights and measures. This is very important when one of your most important commodities, gold, is being used as currency throughout the empire. You want to make sure that in one area of your empire that might be 500 miles away from another area of your empire, that they are all weighing and measuring this very important substance of gold the same way. Additionally, he appointed market inspectors throughout the empire. This is very important, again, when you talk about the ubiquitous presence of gold throughout this empire. Why would you need market inspectors for gold? Well, because for any of you geology fans out there, you'll know there is another element known as pyrite that looks a lot like gold, but isn't, and does not have the value that gold does. So these market inspectors that Askia Muhammad appointed would go out to make sure that people weren't being defrauded. They weren't being, given back their change, so to speak, in pyrite versus gold. You need to do this to protect your economy from within. Now, while the Songhai Empire continued to prosper for a century or so after Askia Muhammad's death, we will gradually see the empire kind of overextending themselves, especially in their outlying regions. We'll also see the appearance of foreigners along the west coast of Africa, which will start to degrade the power of these native kingdoms. In particular, we will see the arrival of the Portuguese along the west coast of Africa, starting by the 1440s and 1450s. You can take a look at the map here, and you can see some of these early Portuguese voyages of exploration. They are trying to get from Western Europe all the way to India and China to support the trade in spices. So they are sailing southward to try to get to their destination in the Indian Ocean. They know there's a big land mass here in Africa. They just don't know how big it is. So as they begin venturing southward, they start to come across several island chains off the west coast of Africa, the Canary Islands, the Cape Verde Islands, and what have you. And here's where the story takes a very grim turn. In our first installment of Let's Blame the 15th Century Portuguese, here's where we have to talk about some bad behavior on their part. What the Portuguese will do is, when they land on these islands, they notice that this is a perfect, very warm, tropical environment for growing sugarcane. Sugarcane will not grow in the colder climates of Northern Europe, but Europeans love to sweeten their tea. They love to sweeten their cakes and what have you. So the Portuguese see this as a business opportunity. They will begin enslaving the residents of these islands off the west coast of Africa and forcing them to work on sugarcane plantations. When they desire more humans to do the work that they don't want to do for themselves, the Portuguese will also start landing along the west coast of Africa and brokering a deal with African tribal chiefs. The deal the Portuguese will make is, you bring us slaves from the interior of the continent to the coastal areas. We board them up on our ships, take them to these islands to work for us, and in exchange we give you weapons, specifically firearms and cannons, advanced weaponry that many of these African tribal chiefs did not yet have access to. So this is the grim calculation, an exchange of human beings for advanced weapons. What this will mean for the Songhai, as well as thousands of other civilizations in West Africa, is their numbers are now going to be severely depleted. They will be enslaved, walked to coastal areas to be boarded on ships, first by the Portuguese, and then later the Spanish will appear. And then when the so-called New World, the Americas, is discovered, it will be, these numbers will just increase, the numbers of men, women, and children who will be stolen from their homeland and now forced across the Atlantic Ocean, never to see their homeland again. It's clear that this will cause the wholesale collapse of thousands of West African civilizations over the next few hundred years. I want to move now to East Africa and spend a few minutes talking about the Swahili civilization along the East Coast. The Swahili civilization is sometimes referred to as the Swahili city-states. Very important distinction that you need to take note of. For the Swahili coast, you're not talking about one unified empire, one unified kingdom. Instead, it's these fiercely independent city-states, Malindi, Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, these sorts of things. So make sure that you understand that their political affiliation was not united in any way. It was their primary loyalty was to their local city-state. Swahili civilization really appears to have reached kind of its apex between about 500 and 1500 CE, and the focus of their money-making ventures was overseas trade. They're here along the east coast of Africa, and so they are trading to the north of them with the Arabian Peninsula, and then they're also taking advantage of seasonal monsoon winds to trade across the Indian Ocean. So they're also trading as far east as the Indian subcontinent. Their chief trade items were goods like ivory, sandalwood, ebony, and gold, as well as importing textiles from the Arabian Peninsula and spices from the Indian subcontinent. These cities, like Kilwa or Malindi, were very cosmopolitan places. If you walked along the streets during this period, you would have heard many different languages. You would have seen mosques. Islam will make its way into this region over time. You would also see native priests practicing the polytheistic faith. These were quite interesting and very vibrant cities during their heyday. Their language also reveals this kind of interplay between many different cultures. The Swahili language is made up of Bantu, which is a native tongue, and Arabic, which is a nod to the Arab traders that they were communicating with regularly to the north of them. Unfortunately, we need to move into phase 2 today of let's blame the Portuguese. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Portuguese will make an unwelcome appearance along the Swahili states, along the east coast of Africa. In 1498, the first Portuguese explorer arrived, Vasco da Gama. He had made that trip around the southern tip of Africa and had now managed to make it to Kilwa and Mombasa, several other areas, to use them as a launching point to get over to the Indian subcontinent. In 1505, Vasco da Gama returned for a second trip to the Swahili states, this time attacking Kilwa and Mombasa with cannons. This is how an observer on one of the Portuguese ships described the scene that then unfolded. Quote, "Then everyone started to plunder the town and to search the houses, forcing open the doors with axes and iron bars. A large quantity of rich silk and gold-embroidered clothes was seized, and carpets also. One of these was without equal for beauty and was sent to the King of Portugal, together with many other valuables." Essentially, the Portuguese wanted native Africans to have no share in this very lucrative trade with the Indian subcontinent, so they then set about conquering the city-states along the eastern coast. Beyond that immediate loss, in the late 17th century, Oman in the south of the Arabian Peninsula went on to conquer the, by then, all Portuguese-controlled cities along the eastern coast. Altogether, this was a very sad end to the Swahili civilization. In the little bit of time we have left, I wanted to talk about the complex at Great Zimbabwe in what is now present-day Mozambique and Zimbabwe. This is one of the few indigenous African civilizations never to be touched by outsiders, by Europeans. It was a large stone complex known as Great Zimbabwe that probably supported a population around 18,000 inhabitants. Theirs was a monarchy ruled by a king and his family. They traded in gold, ivory, copper. They also raised cattle. It remains a mystery what happened to these people. Probably environmental factors, but we will never know for sure.